Puka frickin' Nacua. Is it a meal? Like a $40 meal, but like, it's not that good. Like the quality is like slightly above the quality of McDonald's, but like it costs like double Olive Garden, Is it that? No? Okay, well, if it's not that, I guess it must be a football player then. Oh, he's the second best fantasy wide receiver right now? Oh, sure. Why didn't you say so? That makes perfect sense. So if you're like me and you didn't know who this guy was before the season started, you know what? That's not really your fault. You're blameless for that. He wasn't. I don't even know when he was drafted. He wasn't drafted very high. He's only the hottest name in fantasy football right now. And for fantasy purposes, the thing that makes the rise of Puka Nacua so interesting is that traditionally for the receiver position, the people who finish at the top of the rankings are more or less the ones you expect to. In the running back position every year, there's some guy from like outside the top 30 who ends up becoming a running back 1 by the end of the season, like Miles Sanders last year, or Josh Jacobs is a great example. Brian Robinson, Kyron Williams, and Jerome Ford, who all could make that name for themselves. And it happens because running backs get injured quite often, whereas receivers can usually play a full season. And then there's the secondary effect of like when receivers get hurt, most of the time the second guy doesn't just come in and take all of that receiver's work. There's like more of a trickle down that happens, and like if Justin Jefferson were to go down, his 32% target share or whatever, wouldn't it all go to Jordan Addison? It would get spread out to Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, TJ Hawkinson. It goes all the way down the wide receiver depth chart. Whereas for running backs, Nick Chubb goes down, and it's highly likely that next week Jerome Ford is going to get 80% of what Nick Chubb got over the last 2 weeks of the season. So that's why Puka Nacua is so interesting for fantasy purposes. He's a receiver from way outside the preseason rankings, a guy who wasn't even being drafted in the vast majority of leagues, and he's all of a sudden the most valuable fantasy wide receiver to have at the moment. If we want some insight into just how valuable he is, this is him compared to every other rookie wide receiver this year. As you can see, it's not particularly close. He has 52 PPR fantasy points through 2 games, whereas people like Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, Jaden Reed, the next ones up, barely hover around 30. If we expand that chart to all players this season, he's only behind Tyreek Hill. He's ahead of the likes of Justin Jefferson, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, all guys who've had incredibly hot starts to the season, but none of them quite as hot as Puka. So that's this season. What if we expanded the chart to include the last 20 years? And we'll start with all players in that span, not just rookies. At the top, you've got guys like Calvin Ridley, Cooper Kupp, Julio Jones, and Puka Nacua sits very comfortably at 13th overall. And something that's kind of interesting is that the leaders on this chart aren't all guys who are drafted in the first round, even drafted in the first 2 days. A lot of these guys are day 3 picks. And I don't remember off the dome, but I think Cooper Kupp was a day 3 pick. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek, Victor Cruz, definitely. Victor Cruz might have been undrafted. I don't really remember. But there's all of these guys who kind of comp favorably, I guess, for Puka Nacua to follow their career arcs. And if he ends up being as good as any of these guys, he could end up being really significant, not just for this season, but for many seasons to come. However, if we filter this chart down to just rookies, just the first 2 games of every single wide receiver's rookie season over the last 20 years, we can see that there are a lot of players who have kind of underperformed relative to their incredible starts to their careers. On this chart, Puka Nacua is second in PPR fantasy points, behind only Anquan Boldin, who in 2003 put up 55.9 through his first 2 games, and ended up having one of the greatest rookie wide receiver seasons of all time. However, for a lot of the other guys on this list, their careers kind of peaked at these points. At 3, we have Eddie Royal. At 4, we have Terry McLaurin, who by no means is bad, but who has never finished as a wide receiver 1 over a full season. At 6, we have Martavis Bryant. At 8, we have Corey Coleman. At 11, we have Rondale Moore. But on the flip side, we've got guys who've had incredible careers, like DeAndre Hopkins at 9, Calvin Johnson at 13, Amari Cooper at 14. So whether or not Puka Nacua will be any good next season, the seasons after that, or, even the rest of this season, we really can't tell, especially once Cooper Kupp comes back from injury. I mentioned how before when receivers go down with injuries, all of their targets kind of trickle down rather than going on to the next big guy. And it'll probably work inversely too with Puka, where when Cooper Kupp comes back, he's not going to lose all of his targets all of a sudden, but he's bound to take a production hit once the Rams' all-pro slot receiver comes back. So, what does all of this mean for fantasy? My short-term takeaway, and what I've applied to all of these teams, is that there's no reason yet to expect Puka to fall off. He's a major historical outlier so far, and until he gives us reason to doubt him, there's no reason for us to doubt him. With that in mind, over all 25 of these fantasy teams, I successfully picked him up in 9, a number that would make him our 3rd most rostered receiver after fellow rookie Zay Flowers. Most of these 9 teams are going to be starting Puka for week 3, and some of them already even cashed in on Puka's massive week 2, with both team 3 and team 4 cashing in on his 20 target, 15 catch outburst. And for now, we're probably just going to keep starting him and keep riding the Puka wave, and we're just going to have to hope that he doesn't fall off too soon. We might end up trying to trade him as we come closer to Kupp's return, but odds are he'll be more valuable than any other waiver wire pickup for the rest of the season, and he'll probably almost guaranteed be rostered until the end of the year. Anyway, slightly different episode this week. If you're interested how we did in week 2, we ended up winning 60% of our games, 15 out of 25. And you know what? Here's the whole chart for this week if you want to look at it. But really, I thought it would be more interesting to talk about Puka. So anyway, coming up for week 3, hopefully the picture of Puka Nacua will become slightly clearer.